Hi everyone, glad to see you back on the channel. Today we're going to take a deep, honest look at why Russia's military campaign in Ukraine began collapsing from the very first days of the invasion. This isn't about a single battle or one bad decision. It's about a chain of failures that stacked on top of each other, turning what Moscow expected to be a short, decisive operation into a prolonged and deeply damaging war. From the start, Russia's leadership believed Ukraine would fall quickly. This assumption shaped every plan that followed. Russian commanders expected minimal resistance, fast political collapse in Kiev, and Ukrainian forces either surrendering or switching sides. Because of this belief, the invasion was not structured for a long, hard fight. When that assumption proved wrong, the entire operation began unraveling almost immediately. One of the biggest reasons for the collapse was catastrophic intelligence failure. Russian intelligence services repeatedly told political leaders what they wanted to hear rather than what was true. Reports suggested Ukrainian society was divided, the government was weak, and the military was unprepared. In reality, Ukraine had spent years reforming its armed forces, training with Western partners, and building national unity around defense. When Russian troops crossed the border, they encountered a motivated and prepared enemy instead of a collapsing state. This intelligence failure wasn't just about Ukraine. It was also about Russia itself. Decision. Makers believed their own military was far more capable than it actually was. Training reports were exaggerated, readiness levels were inflated, and corruption hid deep structural problems. On paper, Russia looked like a modern, powerful force. On the ground, it quickly became clear that much of this strength was an illusion. Another early problem was the invasion plan itself. Russia attempted to launch a massive, multi-directional attack across thousands of kilometers all at once. Forces pushed toward Kiev from the north, Kharkiv from the east, and deep into southern Ukraine simultaneously. This stretched logistics, command, and control beyond their limits. Instead of concentrating force, Russia diluted it, allowing Ukrainian defenders to slow, disrupt, and isolate advancing units. Logistics turned into a nightmare almost immediately. Russian forces were not supplied for sustained combat. Fuel ran out, food spoiled, spare parts were missing, and ammunition deliveries were inconsistent. Long convoys became stuck on narrow roads, vulnerable to ambush. Soldiers were left scavenging for food, abandoning vehicles, and losing morale. A modern army cannot function without reliable logistics, and Russia's system failed under real combat conditions. Corruption played a massive role in this logistical collapse. Funds meant for maintenance, fuel quality, vehicle upgrades, and soldier welfare had been stolen for years. Trucks broke down because cheap parts were used, tires disintegrated because they were old or poorly stored, radios failed because modern equipment existed only on paper. When the war began, there was no way to hide these problems anymore. Command and control failures made everything worse. Russian military culture discourages initiative at lower levels. Officers are expected to follow orders strictly, even when conditions change. When plans failed, many units froze instead of adapting. Junior officers were not empowered to make decisions, and senior officers often lacked accurate information from the front. This led to confusion, delays, and repeated tactical mistakes. Communication systems also failed badly. Secure radios were insufficient or broken, forcing many units to use civilian phones or unencrypted channels. Ukrainian forces intercepted communications, tracked movements, and targeted command elements. This not only caused military losses but shattered trust within Russian units, as soldiers realized their conversations were being monitored. Leadership failures were visible from the very top. The invasion was planned and approved by a small circle of people who did not tolerate dissent. Military professionals who raised concerns were ignored or sidelined. Once the war began, political leaders interfered with military decision making, setting unrealistic goals and deadlines. This prevented honest assessments and necessary adjustments. Another key factor was the complete misunderstanding of Ukrainian morale. Russian planners expected Ukrainian soldiers to flee and civilians to remain passive or even welcoming. Instead, Ukrainian troops fought aggressively, and civilians supported them with intelligence, logistics, and resistance. Territorial defense units sprang up across the country, making every town and road dangerous for invading forces. Urban warfare exposed Russian weaknesses even further. Russian forces were poorly trained for fighting in cities. They lacked proper infantry support, coordination, and reconnaissance. Tanks and armored vehicles advanced without adequate protection, becoming easy targets for portable anti-tank weapons. Ukrainian forces used small, mobile teams to devastating effect, destroying columns and spreading panic. The Russian military also underestimated modern Western supplied weapons. Systems like portable anti-tank missiles, drones, and precision artillery allowed Ukrainian forces to hit hard and withdraw quickly. Russian armor, designed for older forms of warfare, proved vulnerable. The psychological impact of seeing supposedly powerful vehicles destroyed by small teams was enormous. Air power, often considered Russia's strength, failed to deliver decisive results. Russian forces did not achieve air superiority. Poor coordination between air and ground units, weak suppression of enemy air defenses, and cautious flying due to losses limited effectiveness. Ukrainian air defenses and man-portable missiles continued to operate, denying Russia freedom of action in the skies. Naval power also underperformed. The Black Sea Fleet failed to decisively control the maritime domain. High-profile losses and cautious tactics reduced its influence. Instead of projecting overwhelming power, Russian naval forces became defensive, further undermining the perception of dominance. Training deficiencies became obvious as casualties mounted. Many Russian soldiers were conscripts or short-term contract troops with limited preparation. Exercises had emphasized parades and scripted drills rather than realistic combat scenarios. When faced with determined resistance, complex terrain, and constant threat, many units struggled to cope. Morale collapsed quickly. Soldiers realized they were not on a simple exercise or peacekeeping mission. They faced constant danger, unclear objectives, and poor living conditions. Reports of heavy losses spread rapidly. Without a clear explanation of why they were fighting, motivation eroded. Desertions, refusals to fight, and discipline problems increased. The lack of a clear political narrative also hurt Russia's effort. The stated goals of the invasion shifted repeatedly. First it was about security, then about regime change, then about territorial claims. This confusion filtered down to the troops and the public. Without a consistent purpose, sustaining support became difficult. Ukraine, by contrast, had a clear and simple message: survival and independence. This clarity unified society and strengthened resistance. Every Russian failure reinforced Ukrainian confidence and international support. As images of destroyed Russian equipment spread globally, the myth of Russian military superiority was shattered. Sanctions and international isolation compounded military problems. Access to advanced technology, spare parts, and financial resources became limited. Over time, this affected everything from precision weapons to vehicle maintenance. While these effects grew stronger later, even early on the anticipation of isolation disrupted planning and morale. Another often overlooked factor was cultural arrogance. Russian leadership believed their military reputation alone would intimidate Ukraine into submission. This arrogance led to careless planning and underestimating the enemy. History shows that wars are rarely won by reputation alone, and Ukraine proved this decisively. The failure to secure rear areas and supply lines allowed Ukrainian forces to strike deep behind advancing units. Small ambushes multiplied into major disruptions. Each destroyed truck or captured supply depot had ripple effects far beyond its immediate location. Russian forces never fully regained operational momentum after these early setbacks. As casualties rose, Russia attempted to hide losses and maintain the image of control. This created a feedback loop of denial. Honest reporting was discouraged, preventing lessons from being learned quickly. Mistakes were repeated because acknowledging them was politically dangerous. The use of fear-based discipline further damaged effectiveness. Soldiers motivated by fear of punishment rather than belief in the mission are less adaptable and less resilient. This approach may enforce obedience in peacetime, but it collapses under the stress of modern warfare. Ukraine's effective use of information warfare magnified Russian failures. Videos of destroyed columns, captured soldiers, and intercepted communications spread rapidly. This damaged Russian morale and boosted Ukrainian confidence. In the digital age, perception can influence reality, and Russia lost control of the narrative early. Another critical issue was the mismatch between strategic goals and available forces. Russia attempted to achieve political transformation with a force designed for intimidation, not occupation and stabilization. When quick victory failed, there was no plan B ready. Adjusting on the fly proved costly and slow. The Russian military also struggled with joint operations. Coordination between ground forces, air units, artillery, and electronic warfare was inconsistent. Each branch often operated in isolation, reducing overall effectiveness. Modern warfare demands integration, and Russia failed to deliver it consistently. The early loss of elite units further damaged capability. Airborne and special forces were used aggressively but without adequate support. Heavy losses among these experienced troops removed some of the most capable elements from the battlefield early in the war. Overconfidence at the top prevented timely adaptation. Rather than reassessing strategy after initial failures, leadership doubled down on flawed assumptions. This wasted time and resources while Ukraine strengthened its defenses and international backing. The collapse from day one was not a single dramatic moment, but a steady erosion of effectiveness. Every failure fed into the next. Logistics weakened combat power. Poor leadership reduced morale. Intelligence failures led to bad decisions. Together, they created a downward spiral that Russia has struggled to escape. It's important to understand that this collapse does not mean individual Russian soldiers lacked courage or skill. Many fought under extremely difficult conditions. The failure was systemic, rooted in corruption, authoritarian decision-making, and decades of neglected reform. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel.